All right, hey everybody, for another episode of the Couch Chat, and we're talking how this will happen, right? How will we bring things together into a single parish, especially financially? So much of our stuff is already brought together. You think of RCA, the Easter Vigil, all those sorts of things, Alpha done together, but we kind of got to talk about this financially. Last week's video kind of talked about the big picture of why we're going to bring things into a single entity and not keep like each parish split out as a separate department, and how that'll work. And so watch that if you've got questions about that. The next question though is like, okay, that's great if that's how we're going to have money budgeted for evangelization, money budgeted to keep this whatever parish's buildings and grounds up. Well, who's going to decide, right? How does that work? Of who decides how much money goes to what thing, right? Who's gonna decide on the budget, right? Who's gonna make the recommendation to say, hey, this church's windows need fixed. They need fixed, but yet this parish's furnace is out, and so how do we make the decision? First thing right now is the Lord provides a lot. That's just the first thing to remember. The Lord provides a lot. He's continued to provide for us over the years. So just the first thing before we get into the details is, as my mom used to say, God's got a lot of money. First of all, let's just trust that he's going to take care of things, right? The Lord is good. The Lord is merciful. That doesn't mean he gives us everything we want, because that's not always good for us. But the Lord is really good to us. So let's not forget that as long as we rely on him, things should be all right. All right, with that being said, sometimes you still have to have a bit of practical wisdom as to what we're going to do, when, and what's first priority, what's second priority. At the end of the day, in like church law and everything, this makes me uncomfortable, but here it is that the pastor decides. Right? The pastor is the one who decides how money gets used. I'm the representative of the church financially. And so that means like it's not pastoral council's decision to do something. What pastoral council does is they recommend something. The church law calls them a consultative body, so people that I consult with. Now, fair enough, right? The pastor's the one who has to make the decision, yes or no. I'm not capable of making all of these decisions. One, I'm not smart enough. I don't know everything about air conditioning, about HVAC, about windows, all those sorts of things. So it's great to talk things over, to have a group of people, and even as conversations come, you hear, okay, this is where we need to go, and everybody can kind of get on board with that. So part of the question is, well, what groups will there be? And so the group that talked about all of these things made these recommendations to myself, but then to the other committee members, said, well, let's continue to have a 12-person pastoral council for everything, right? For the whole new Holy Face of Jesus parish. We'll have one 12-person pastoral council. Makes perfect sense. Things are going well there as it is. Secondly, a finance committee. So the finance committee is basically tasked with making sure the finances are running smooth, making sure proper audits are done, checking in on checks and balances, all of those sorts of things. And it made sense that things will be pulled together to have a single finance committee, because having 4 different groups saying how the money should be managed, it wouldn't make sense, right? It wouldn't make sense to kind of have to go to 4 different boards for the same entity. So to have a single 8-person finance committee was what was recommended. I think it'll be a great thing. 8 people seems like a good number to have those solid discussions, to be able to dive into the details with having enough ears and eyes and voices to kind of discuss things. And having 8 makes it able to have 2 people from each parish currently. And then the last kind of body that we have is a buildings and grounds committee. And this is where we had a little bit of question, because if we have one buildings and grounds committee for the 4 campuses, that's a lot. That's 13 buildings. That's a lot to keep track of. However, the other side was, well, there has to be one body that is making recommendations, right? So there has to be one group that's able to say, the roof of this parish, terrible. It needs to be prioritized, and the whatever, maybe the foundation of this parish, although foundations are pretty big problems, can wait a year, whatever. Like, there has to be one group who's overseeing everything that can give advice to the pastor as to what needs to be done first, second, or third. So the group that kind of hashed all these things out recommended having a single 8-person buildings and grounds committee, but then to have this understanding that what we would be doing is bringing people in to say, so-and-so knows electric and knows all the wiring that's happened in this parish for so long. Let's bring them in. They can kind of give the story. They can give the advice. They know things that are going on here. So it's basically to have that one group able to kind of get as much input from people who are knowledgeable and be able to then sit down, make prioritizations, and make sure everything's running well. So that was the recommendation. And then there was also this sort of understanding that, well, we might need to define the buildings and grounds role is basically oversight to make sure everything is functional, everything's being maintained. Just because to use their eyes, to use just kind of, people talking to them, and then to kind of talk about the major projects. But we do have paid maintenance staff, right? We have people who clean, people who fix little things here and there, and bigger things here and there sometimes. But so the Buildings and Grounds Committee then would focus on bigger issues, kind of long-term improvements, and also just another set of eyes to say, hey, this isn't working well. What can we do about that? And sometimes then the maintenance staff can say, oh, yeah, good thing. Didn't notice that. And we'll get it taken care of. So that's kind of how the decision-making bodies will do. And I say decision-making bodies, their primary goal is consultative to make recommendations. But of course, any pastor knows that he can't do everything himself, right? You've got to rely on these people for advice, for listening, for pushing back a little bit, kind of holding things in tension so that we can have the honest discussion to figure out the truth of the matter. So that's kind of that's the plan there with who will advise, right? Who will recommend in these different groups that'll be participating, helping serve the entire parish. So thanks again for another episode of the Couch Chat. We'll be back in next week. Be back next week. I was going to say just back in a few minutes because I'm going to record the next one right after this. But see you next week.